Hello, thanks for joining me, Josie, host of the Photopocene podcast, where I chat about eco-conscious photo art with photographers worldwide. This episode is a little bit different as I'm joined by a multidisciplinary art activist, Eva Lawrence. Eva doesn't work primarily in or with photography, but we spoke about how vital it is as a tool to raise awareness of environmental issues. Our conversation took us from jellyfish to permafrost melting and releasing ancient viruses, to protecting wildland under threat from development, to subliminal ways to influence a consumerist society, plus much, much more. Do keep listening. So a really warm welcome this time to a art activist and multidisciplinary artist, Eva Lawrence. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's really good to have you here. I'm really quite intrigued to chat to you about your work and the thinking behind the work and all of the different sort of environmental influences on your work. But because you do work across a number of different sort of art forms, that's slightly different to the usual Photopocene conversations that I have with people specifically working in or with photography. But I'm really, really fascinated to find out a little bit more, not only about, what is inspiring you to create your work, but how you also then actually use photography to raise its profile, share what you're doing. And I think also just in the context of perhaps archiving the work as well. So I think it will be a really interesting chat that we're going to have. So really looking forward to it. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Eva, but I believe you are currently based in London.
I am currently based in London, but I have links in Manchester and Barcelona in Spain too.
Fantastic. And I think Barcelona is a place that you studied, is that right?
Yeah, I studied there for 6 months. I made a lot of work while I was there as well, which is great.
It's one of those places that I absolutely do need to go one day. I've heard some some wonderful things about the city itself. But what were you actually doing there then? You were studying, but what were you studying and what were you creating while you were living in Barcelona?
I went from studying fine art and art history in Manchester to doing 6 months of just fine art in Spain, and it was in classes that were only in Catalan and Spanish, so it was quite challenging. But it was an interesting setup because they work very differently to British universities in that in the UK you're kind of just given a studio space and told to do whatever you want, and over there you have separate classes for each individual discipline. So it was a really good way to kind of dabble in lots of different practices while I was over there. And also get integrated into the arts scene over there. They've got a really interesting kind of popular thing going on called Occupy Houses, where it's loads of young artists who are kind of squatting and making art up in the mountains. So it's a great experience.
That sounds absolutely amazing, and just must be really fulfilling to get all of that energy off other people as well. I think sometimes if you're an artist, you might find that you're often working alone or you're thinking alone. So that must be a really a lovely sort of opportunity. But one of the things that you've already sort of mentioned to me about your time in Barcelona was that you actually created pieces from your own plastic use. And sort of in these sort of jellyfish type forms.
Yeah.
What was that actually all about then, and why did you do that?
So, I mean, first of all, I was kind of limited with budget and materials while I was over there. And I just started kind of gathering what I could from random bits of waste and things. but the jellyfishes themselves, I was inspired to make work about them from a piece that I saw a couple years before by a group called the Rimini Protocol. And it had an actual jellyfish tank in it, and it was talking about how jellyfish have been here for, what is it, 600 plus million years on Earth. And the piece is kind of looking at humans in relation to jellyfish and who is most likely to last longer post-apocalypse wise. So I've been thinking about jellyfish a lot from that piece. So I started making them from the plastic waste to kind of make like a mobile like structure. But in the end, I ended up actually taking them to the beaches in Spain, and trying to talk to people about plastic waste and about how global warming is affecting jellyfish populations. They love global warming because
yes,
the warm water is actually, it extends their breeding season. So the jellyfish are going nuts right now, and all the plastic in the sea is killing off their predators, and our overfishing is killing off their predators. So they're a really interesting animal because they both kind of encompass all the kind of climate warming aspects of climate change, but also the pollution problem of climate change. So they're a great conversation starter for sure.
Yeah, you very kindly sent some of photos and some examples of what you've done, and they look yeah they I can see that they could be really good ways to start those conversations.
And also people know about the plastic problem, so I think it's a good way to begin conversations about climate. People like to talk about things they're comfortable talking about. You start off talking about the plastic, and then you talk about global warming, and you can kind of delve deeper into it.
Yeah, absolutely. With that project as well, you actually, I believe, you actually went on to raise some money for Oceana.
Yeah.
From that.
Yeah, it wasn't much at all because it was just from the conversations that I had with people along the beaches, and I was just kind of selling the jellyfish, and then whatever people wanted to donate, I would then donate to Oceana from them.
Yeah.
So, we're only talking like 5-10 euros.
Oh, every little helps. So, not to quote a well-known supermarket. But your sort of I guess ethos, philosophy around the ways you work, it's all sort of relating to protest, what might happen after this is another word, Eva, I can't say very well. I can't say it. You're going to have to say it.
Anthropocene apocalypse.
That's the one. Climate change and utopia as well. So you have all of those elements sort of in your mind when you're making your work. And I have made a note here as well that one of the things that I read was that you're quite keen in sort of subverting elitism in the art world, which is something I sort of was drawn to, because I guess for myself, I just think art is there and it should be, open to all, and people can take from it what they want, but not to feel excluded. So I'm really intrigued around how you're working, I guess, with street art as well.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm really not interested the majority of the time in kind of white cube spaces, and obviously I'm trying to be an artist, so I need to try and make money from my practice. But that's not so important to me. What is important is getting art out in the public, and kind of in doing so making people question the status quo of what public space looks like and who gets to decide what that looks like. And so, yeah, street art wise, it's photography is an incredibly important part of that because it's not permanent. A lot of my work isn't permanent, it's there and then it's gone. So documentation wise, photography is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess sharing the work, I mean, do you use sort of photography to share your work in other ways then as well, sort of social media, or do you print any of the images of the work that you've created and sort of then share them on that way?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, Instagram and everything in terms of getting work out to a wider audience can be incredibly useful. But also, yeah, I do a lot of kind of really cheap printing off either paintings or posters and things that I make, drawings that I've done. I photocopy a lot and just mix up some really easy wheat flour paste. You just mix flour and water with a little bit of PVA in there. And then just go and put that on billboards and shops and all sorts of bits, really.
Now, with the street art side of things, then I've got a note here, and you might have to explain a little bit more to me about it. Is your virus sculptures? I think they copper or
bronze, yeah.
Bronze. So the images I've actually got of those is that they're actually sort of planted in the ocean, along the shoreline. So what can you tell me about that series or that work? Sorry.
So that work I made in 2019 when I was in Spain. So pre-pandemic. And
almost quite knowing.
Yeah. Freaky, I'm not gonna lie. But the whole concept for them was about the threat of global warming, melting permafrost ice, and inside the permafrost ice, the likelihood is that there are ancient bacteria and ancient viruses that could be released into our kind of water supplies. And so the concept of putting them on the beaches, and again kind of discussing with people going past what the work is about, is kind of making that invisible threat visible, because I think a lot of the time in the West or the global North, there's this perception that climate change, we're going to be immune to it because it's going to affect the South quicker. But as we are now very aware, a global pandemic is truly a global concern. And I think by making that threat visible, hopefully kind of removes that idea that we're invincible and that we don't need to do anything because it won't affect us.
Definitely. And I can actually, I mean, the actual sort of pieces you've made are very reminiscent of the images that you see of, I guess, the COVID structure of the virus. So
yeah, I mean, when I'm obsessed with that structure, and when this pandemic first started, I was just filming the news all the time because they would have these weird things floating around the screen. Like, whose decision was that? Who's the BBC's art director? How can I find them?
Well, talking of sort of moving image then as well, I think you've also recently made a film called Venting in Ryebank. Is this in Manchester? Is that where that was made?
It's in Manchester. It's about a piece of wild land that is currently under threat from development of executive properties, and it's wild land that was gifted to the university, Manchester Metropolitan, to be used as playing fields, and it's now that university that is trying to sell the land, and how it was meant to be for community, and now it's being developed. And Manchester is particularly interesting. It's one of the most rapidly growing cities in Europe at the moment. So the work, I made these crazy costumes of vents. Vents actually first was inspired by in Spain. And in the film, these vents kind of break out of this metal cage that the development company was digging in at the time to try and work out if the land was safe or not. And the vents kind of explore this environment kind of naively, but also towards the end, they work out what's happening and diggers are coming in and everything. It's only a 10-minute short film, and it's quite absurd and surreal. Quite make total sense. But I do like that work a lot.
Yeah, I did have a look at it, and yeah, I do. It would be great if anyone listening in, obviously, goes and checks that out as well. I'll make sure we share all the links for you so people can see it. And it's definitely something that I'm sure will be a conversation starter. I do love the way that you're using items or creating items that are not the usual. And I think humour as well possibly is an element that, sometimes these topics can be quite overwhelming. So do you find sort of you having humour within your work is something that you sometimes also use?
Yeah, I definitely massively lean on it. I think the doom and gloom of the climate crisis is terrifying, and no one wants to talk about it, including often myself.
Yeah.
um, and so I think having that element of humor or absurdity, to lighten it a little bit, to is makes it far more approachable and makes people want to talk about it so much more. um yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely an important part of my work.
Well, one of the things, sort of talking of sort of humorous things, then, obviously I live in Cornwall, so this last weekend we were visited by the G7
Yeah.
summit, but I think probably among all of the sort of local protests and demonstrations and some of the actual really creative things that people did to try and get their point across was, did you see the Mount Recycle more at all, electronic waste and how we tackle that? It's quite a sort of almost a humorous take on it as well. So it really does sort of play, I think, to the same sort of ways that you might use humour within your work as well. And certainly got a lot of people talking, I think. So definitely try if you can to have a look at it.
It gets people talking. There's power in it.
Absolutely. One of the things that's quite new, I think, or quite recent for you is a project called Radical Hope, and
Yeah.
that's in London. And I'll let you describe it, but for me, sort of touching back on the photography side of things, it's quite a visual way in a community to share um, information as well. So what's that one all about?
Yeah, I think of all my works recently, that's definitely the most photography based.
Mhm.
And it was digitally created as well. It's very different to the usual ways I work. And so the poster itself, it has this kind of visual of a globe that also looks a bit like a virus cracking open. And then all of these coming out of it is like a little plant, and then also a lot of Instagram accounts that are sharing information and hope, and activism. Because I think I started to think about how so many people just look through Instagram for hours, and a lot of their Instagram feeds will just be beautiful models or like celebrities,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I about a year ago kind of completely rejigged my whole Instagram feed so that I was kind of only getting things that I thought were positive and inspiring and informative. And so I kind of gathered all these different accounts together and put them all on a poster, which I started off by just printing out cheaply and postering up around my area. And then I applied to an open call with Creative People and Places Hounslow, who then commissioned it to put on some electronic billboards around the borough. So it's been on bus stops and in shopping centres, just which will a little bit, not much, but still a little bit, kind of what's the word? Break into the kind of consumerist
Mm.
visual bombardment that we get every day. So yeah, I'm proud of that one.
Yeah, I think it's a really excellent way to actually be able to share sort of a message and like you say, in a consumerist society where that's what people are pretty much encouraged to do.
And easy to fall into, I feel like it's so easy to just kind of get caught up in it all. So to have something that has like an accessible list of some people you might want to look at or get inspired by.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, in sort of it can start you on the right track as well, because sometimes if you get those hints and you find those people, and then you'll find other people as well, and it can sort of snowball. So you're looking at things that, like you say, will hopefully could potentially change someone's way of seeing something, perhaps around climate change, or not using single-use plastic, or whatever it might be. So do you tend to work, when you're creating your work, do you tend to have a set process, because you're obviously very varied in what you create, but do you have any sort of set process, and in that process does photography sort of play a part in sort of idea stages, things like that?
Photography, I mean, set process, not really, because it really depends on the type of work and the project, and whether I'm working with a community group or whether I'm working alone or collaborating with a friend, and work is about, and all these different things. But photography is definitely a very important part of the process in terms of, documenting kind of the lead up, and then most vitally at the end for me, because a lot of my work is installation based. I'm learning the hard way after university that it's very necessary to get some good pictures at the end. Photography is definitely a vital part of it, and something that I'm trying to take a more active role in bettering my understanding of, for sure. But for example, one of the projects I've been doing past 2 years is taking pictures of canisters, like the laughing gas canisters, that kind of litter cities at the moment. Little metal laughing gas canisters are widely taken as like a quick high. And I've been writing little messages on them and then putting them back where I found them and taking pictures of them then. And then if I stumble across them again, taking more pictures. And that hasn't really kind of developed into a final product yet, but it's one of those things that photography is playing a very important.
Yeah, it almost feels as though it could be one of those occasions, almost, if someone, I don't know, people sometimes say, oh, they might put like a mark on a pound coin, and how will it sort of find its way back again? There's almost something, that sort of element in my head when you described it, sort of sort of the way things sort of move around. I think one of the other projects that you've spoken about prior to us chatting today was your Miran project.
Miran, yes.
Miran, sorry.
It means they watch.
Okay. So what was that one about? Because I think it's to do with plants and flowers around Barcelona, but you used your images as the basis.
Yeah. So it was one of the classes that I did while I was studying there. The ultimate end goal of the class was to make a little book, and I'd never really had to work like that before, to have an end goal that I had to stick to. And to work out what we all wanted to do, we went out into this very strange little suburban town. It's only, if you think about it in the scale of London, if you went half an hour out of London, you'd still very much feel like you were in London. But in this little town, it was very small, and it was almost like a little farmery community, because it's so close to Barcelona. The kind of signs of the city encroaching out, inning and like motorways, and there's a steel works near there, and just industry definitely creeping in. And so I took a lot of pictures of those kind of elements of the environment and how it was juxtaposed. And then on top of those images, I drew, inspired by the plants that I'd also taken photos of on those trips. I drew those plants kind of taking over and reclaiming back their land and kind of attacking the motorways, and made a little story about how they're coming for the whole city soon. Yeah, they're quite fun little drawings, but it was an interesting project, and I left feeling quite sad for little Colonia Guel was its name.
Oh. You keep a lookout as to whether or not it can hold off the like you say, the expansion of
Yeah, or the plant invasion.
yeah. I think is there a program somewhere vaguely in my memory banks, was it Day of the Triffids? Was that yeah?
It's definitely that book, and the imagery of the 1980s series definitely a big inspiration for me in my work. It's that idea of kind of nature fighting back, but the film is hilarious because the flowers are like the least scary things in the world, but at the time it was quite terrifying, apparently.
Yeah. But it's very true, actually, sort of how nature can quite quickly, if left to its own devices, sort of reset itself. I guess, in a way. And
yeah, I mean, just over the pandemic we've seen it.
Yeah, definitely. It's been really interesting to sort of watch that. And I'm although I don't photograph abandoned spaces myself, I'm really always fascinated by photographers or filmmakers who or artists who actually do find these places that have been reclaimed, human made, but reclaimed by nature, and just always fascinated.
Yeah, me too. It's that kind of idea of deep time and looking at our place on Earth as something that is, not set in stone and will.
Like you say, without always having to look on the doom or gloom side of things, but just sometimes putting yourself in the context of the bigger picture really can sort of help thought processes, I think, and clarify.
Yeah.
But there is another exhibition show that you're involved with that I think has just started online, which is called the Flux Review.
Oh yeah.
So what's that one about, and how did you get involved with that one?
So I got involved. How did I get involved? I think it was either through an email output or through Curator Space, which, if anyone is listening and looking for things to apply for that doesn't want to spend loads of money on applications and things, go to curatorspace.com. But yeah, that one, it was another open call for work, and they liked a couple of my pieces, and so I got put into it, and it's like a virtual exhibition space. There's been a couple of those recently, which has been exciting to be involved with. But I do miss actual exhibition spaces, and also in particular the kind of exhibition spaces that are not the normal ones, like the abandoned buildings in the parks and stuff like that.
Yeah, taking sort of art almost outside, or like you say, just not always in that expected setting is brilliant. And
I did a great one last year. I was lucky in that little pause when things were actually allowed to be open. It was with Kensington and Chelsea Art Week, but it was in the old telephone exchange building, and the whole exhibition was kind of about climate art and protest art. It was a really interesting group of artists and activists that came together and completely took over the space. It just looked really cool.
If you could take one thing then from sort of all those people that you share space when you're showing work with, what would it be? I mean, in the context of when we are trying to raise awareness of an environmental matter or concern, what do you sort of take away from being with those, I guess, like-minded people?
I think it's an energy. There's an energy that comes with it that is completely addictive and contagious, that energy to keep going and to keep making. One person in particular that came to mind immediately was Sarah Jane Baker. She's a trans ex-prisoner climate activist, and she's just always making work. And meet people like that, it definitely just keeps giving you that push to, even if it sometimes it feels a bit hopeless, and sometimes you're not 100% sure of what you're doing. I think it's definitely so important, especially with things like the street art stuff that I do. It's never polished and it's never perfect, but the joy that I get from just getting out and doing it is so important. And then so many people will see that, and powerful.
Do you ever are you ever able to or do you even want to sort of find out how people react to your work then when it's sort of a street installation, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I've had different encounters. The Oftentimes, I work with one or two other people, and it's oftentimes at night, but sometimes in the day, and you then get the people that come past and talk to you whilst you're doing it. And most of the time that's really positive. And I think it kind of gives people that sense that yes, this is our public space, and that kind of rebellious spirit that comes with the decision to just like draw on something that supposedly you're not supposed to. And I think that is really cool. But there's also been times when people have been very unhappy about the fact that me and officers have been doing it, and that in itself is interesting, and it's definitely something to consider if you're thinking about doing street art work. Is that you do have to be very considerate of the fact that there's a whole, you're going to get a whole mix of people in it. And you have to do it sensitively, and you have to, have those discussions with people who are upset, and kind of bridge the gap in perception of kind of what vandalism is and what street art is. And it's interesting. It's difficult. It's very difficult. And because part of me agrees with them when they're upset that I don't want to be kind of forcing you to look at something that you don't want to look at, but also are not the billboards and companies doing that every day so much worse,
Yeah, absolutely. We are pretty much bombarded with so many so much information, and well, I mean, we could sort of the politics of what information we might or might not see on social media, or where it's placed, and what posters are put up, etc. It's a whole sort of conversation there, isn't it, in itself?
I think art is powerful within that though, because it can evade those algorithms a bit, especially in public space. You're not, there's no algorithm involved, or you're putting something up on you're getting a whole mix of people seeing it that probably wouldn't if it was on Instagram or Facebook. So yeah, that's a cool thing about doing public work.
Well, I hope it will continue, that's for sure, because it's a really vital way. And like you say, it is actually another way for people who aren't, not everyone is looking at social media, or even sort of might just be looking at very specific things. So actually it is another sort of way to get your voice out there, isn't it?
Yeah, and connect community people, because oftentimes, those people who aren't on Facebook or whatever else are oftentimes a bit lonely these days. So, when I'm working and someone talks to me who clearly isn't, it can often be really, really nice, because they're asking you about what else you've got going on in the area, and I've heard that there's a community garden group. I go to this. Would you like to join me one day? And you kind of start these random conversations with people you would never usually speak to.
Yeah, and that's just so valuable, and just really so important. One of the other things I just wanted to touch on with you, Eva, was another project you're involved in, which I think is coming up a little bit later this year. Do correct me if I'm wrong. which is the postcard project.
Oh yeah.
With artists responding to, and I quite like that because we're talking there about being out in the community and having, meeting a variety of people with different ideas and different sort of views on what you might be doing. But this is actually 200 postcards going to 200 artists to reflect on 2020. Can you, I mean, it might be a secret if it's not sort of out there yet, but can you say anything about what you actually did, or just what last year actually meant to you in terms of your work?
Sure. So the small piece that I made for that, I think the exhibition is going to be really interesting, and the tickets are on Eventbrite. If anyone is interested in going, it's going to be in Hackney because it's a random mix of all these different people who have done just very small little responses. But mine was based around an event that I went to kind of in the summer of all the Black Lives Matter protests. And it's an amazing group that is on my Radical Hope poster to follow on Instagram called Babylon Chant Down. And they do these really great kind of music and spoken word events out in parks where they just bring together a load of musicians and poets, and a crowd gathers, and it's all very impromptu, and it's a space for kind of POC voices to be heard. And it was just such a beautiful day, and it was an interesting one because it was such a lovely atmosphere, and there was so many truths being spoken and so much love in the crowd. And then the contrast of how it ends when the police come in and the helicopters come over, and so it was a very interesting day. And so my piece was kind of a reaction to that, a little snapshot of what that kind of looked like through my eyes.
Yeah. And how can people see that work then? Is that going to be online, did you say?
No, this is going to be a physical exhibition.
Oh wow, okay.
On the 14th of August, in a gallery.
Oh my goodness. Oh my, well.
So that is great, and I think once the exhibition goes out, then I will put the work on my website.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I shall make sure, I'll have a look and make sure that link is shared, so people, if they can get to you, can sort of get a ticket and come along and sort of take part. Because I normally ask the photographers taking part how they feel photography can actually influence environmental conversations. So I guess for yourself, it's if you're happy to sort of answer that question, or how it can help you in the way that you work. Yeah, so either way really.
I think there's so many different ways that photography can kind of make a difference in terms of environmental consciousness. I think a lot of it depends on where it goes, and the outreach of it. I think especially if it's in public space, I think it can be very powerful because people are busy, and to be reminded of the environment and the ecological crisis is powerful. And also, I think art and photographic art, kind of as opposed to scientific fact, a lot of the time is more emotional, it's more nuanced, and is not so kind of educationally focused. It gives the viewer a bit more of a kind of space to think and reflect on something. And I think especially in this kind of time of algorithms and division and all these things, giving people that kind of space to think for themselves and reflect on something can change people's consciousness. But also at the same time, it shouldn't be about individuals changing their consciousness, because ultimately it's corporations and legislators that need to do the changing. So I think I was saying earlier about how art can bring energy with it. And I think that energy can be very useful in terms of then getting people to take the action that is necessary to get the corporations and
Yes.
take the action.
Yeah.
For sure, there's an energy in art that we shouldn't underestimate, I don't think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in all its forms. Absolutely. So if people want to learn more about your work, where can they find you? Do you have a website? You mentioned Instagram. How can they find out more?
So they can find me on Instagram at avajoy_arts, or you can find me on Curator Space at Eva Lawrence. Those are my two kind of avenues at the moment. But I keep my Instagram pretty updated, so if you want to see what I'm up to, it's all there.
I'd really like to say a huge thank you for chatting with me tonight, and it's been really lovely and really refreshing as well to sort of. I think it's really important, although I will always say my first love is always going to be photography and photographic art. It's so important to look outwards and look at other art forms, and sometimes I'm quite envious of people who like yourself are able to work across a lot of different disciplines and still do it brilliantly. So
thank you, and thank you for opening up the conversation to kind of incorporate this kind of use of photography, because it's out there and there's a lot of people doing it.
Well, thank you very much, Eva. I really appreciate your time.
Cool, thank you.
That was a great chat with Eva. It's wonderful to learn more about artists and how they use photography in their work, either to share what they're doing or if they're actually creating photographic artwork. It's just really wonderful to learn lots of new things from artists. So thank you to Eva for taking part, and do check out all the links in the podcast details so you can find out more about her work. And if you'd like to take part in the Photopocene podcast, don't forget you can get in touch with me, Josie, at josiepurcellphotography.com. See you next time. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Photopocene podcast, or welcome if it's the first time you're joining me. This time I've had a fab conversation with a photographer and artist who specialises in darkroom printing, portraiture and experimental photography, and that's Sarah Garrod. We talk about how plants have been and are an important aspect of her work. We talk about her interest and love for science, including quantum physics, her passion for working in community darkrooms, and her love of cameraless techniques and painting with light. You might as well, at some point during the conversation, just hear an ice cream van in the background, but I promise nobody ran off to get one. Anyway, do carry on listening in, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. I'm really excited this time to be joined by an experimental photographer and environmentalist, Sarah Garrod. You're based in the UK, aren't you, Sarah?
Yes, I'm over in Greenwich.
And that's in London. And I'm really intrigued by your work. You are particularly concerned with loss and nature, and the aspect of the lost connection between humans and nature.
Yes.
So how do you actually address that then in your own photographic practice?
Yeah, well, I think this is because I grew up in the countryside on more or less a farm, and but I've been living in London for 30 odd years, and in recent years the green spaces in London, are rapidly disappearing. So that's the loss that I see happening everywhere, and with that comes an increase in pollution and everything else, and loss of species.
Yeah.
So so that's where my inspiration for that comes. And I find myself kind of, and particularly since lockdown, gravitating towards plants and using them more in my work, in various ways. So I mentioned to you, I've done a series of prints onto leaves recently, and I use plants to make emulsions, and I use them in cyanotypes to do photograms. So I'm personally getting in touch with nature a bit more, and I feel that a lot of people growing up in London don't have a connection with nature. I'm lucky to have it, but people just don't have time in their life for it. And I've done workshops with teenagers before, and some of them haven't even touched a plant, or they don't know what a weed is. And if we're doing something with plants, they're scared to kind of pick a weed. They don't know what a nettle is. And it's sad, really, that people have lost that connection, especially in cities, with nature. And I really think that's one of the things that's to blame for climate change, really. People just aren't aware. So I feel it's my duty to help that situation out, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously using your talents and your skills in photography is a wonderful opportunity to connect with people and perhaps show people in different ways and inspire them to get excited about nature. But obviously like you mentioned, you've grown up and lived in the countryside, so you've perhaps had that early influence. But how did that then actually influence your way to becoming an eco-conscious photographer? What's your background? What's your story? How do you actually get to sort of the choices you're making photographically now?
Well, that really came about out of necessity. I started kind of working in one darkroom in Greenwich, which was like an evening class, Greenwich Community College darkroom, which was brilliant. After I'd had children, I started kind of dabbling again in photography, more or less just to start off as a hobby. And from there, I went into portraiture. A lot of people kept saying to me, "Oh, would you take pictures of me or my kids?" And I was very popular as a portrait photographer. And I loved working in that darkroom. But there wasn't enough availability. So I then joined one in New Cross, run by a bunch of photographers, called The Gate. And we had a space in a building that was all kind of art studios, but that got knocked down and made into flats. And it lost again. And at that point was when I couldn't do any printing, and I just looked around, and I'd heard about cyanotype, and it seemed like a kind of non-darkroom way of printing. So that's how I got into cyanotype, which then led me to things like anthotype and making my own toners and things like that for prints, and cameraless photography. I mean, I never have had a brilliant posh camera or anything, although I recently inherited a Rolleiflex from an uncle, but which is great. It's very bashed up, but I use Holgers, or I use cameraless techniques. So for me, the equipment and the chemicals aren't so important. Traditional photography chemicals, of course, can be bad for the environment, so I did make a conscious decision to explore other avenues. And working with light, I enjoy kind of molding light and painting with light, literally in the darkroom, or with a cyanotype, using my hands, to make shapes and deflect the light. And light is a free thing as well. So it's just I really enjoyed the scientific side of working with different chemistry from plants, and as well, and light as well, the physical qualities of light. So that I just then became obsessed by that whole route. And at the same time, I'm reading a lot about science and questioning reality, and I love reading about quantum physics. But all
Is
kind of
that your
overlaps.
bedtime reading?
No, that would keep me awake all night.
Oh. Yeah, it's always really wonderful to hear what other sort of disciplines and interests actually inspire photographers as well, sort of behind the scenes. And I think with photography, it's always probably been classed as a sort of a hybrid between science and art almost, because it obviously does have this scientific element and can be used in various formats. When you're actually making your work and your cameraless work, now I know that you do sometimes run workshops. So do you find, like you said, when sort of if you've worked with young people and they've not really come across sort of even flowers or plants, then really unsure about it, do you find the sort of excitement around cameraless photography in workshops is different to how people might connect if you were doing, say, I don't know, a smartphone session?
Yeah, because no one really thinks about how a camera works, I think. But to actually make a photogram with something like a cyanotype, or even in the darkroom, they suddenly understand a bit about light hitting the paper or light hitting the negative in the camera. And that's how the image is produced. And I think until you can understand that, then that's when you start becoming a good photographer. You actually have to understand the very basics. You know, if you just pick up a smartphone and start snapping, you're never going to be a good photographer. But if you actually look at where the light is coming from and what the quality of light is, I mean, the thing that fascinates me about things like cyanotype and infrared photography is that, you know, you're looking at different spectrums that the human eye can't necessarily see, but it is a reality that's out there. And if you're something like an insect, you will see the world differently. And I just find that all absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, isn't it, to sort of think. I think bees, I've seen sort of when they sort of try and show how bees see the world. Yeah, it's sort of quite an amazing and interesting consideration. And so sun printing then is really important to you. Is that, would you say that's now sort of using the sun is primarily how you work now?
The last couple of years, especially with lockdown and darkrooms being closed, I did get quite obsessed, shall we say, with someone who's done cyanotype. Well, no, it's quite an addictive process.
Yes.
Oh,
is that an ice cream van I can hear?
It's an ice cream van. It comes every time I'm doing a recording. It comes past.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
Keep that in. Makes me want to run out and get an ice cream.
I was going to say, do you want to stop so you can go and get one?
Oh, carry on. Where was I? Yeah, so
cyanotypes and lockdown.
Very addictive. I got to a stage where I was cyanotyping everything. You know, so I've done loads of cyanotyped garments. You may have seen on in my blog, I've got a big kimono that I made.
It's amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I've done shirts. I've done things onto different colours. I'm working on a coat. I'm right now wearing a necklace that I made with a cyanotype of a fern inside. So it's just great. If it moves, I cyanotype.
Yeah.
And I was showing someone today these big prints I'd done, basically where I lay on a big cyanotype sheet of paper, semi-naked, hope the neighbours don't see, and you know, get an imprint. And this person was looking at them. She said, "Is that a dragon?" She couldn't quite see what it was, and then when she saw my hand, she realised it was a person. So it's the possibilities with cyanotype are endless. And then, of course, working with negatives with cyanotype is great fun, and toning and painting on top of the cyanotypes, because you're using like watercolor paper as a base quite often. So there's so much you can do. Yeah.
It is a beautiful, beautiful process. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes it's a little bit underrated because it can be so simple,
Yeah.
but it is, like you say, there's the possibilities with it are endless, I guess. And I believe in lockdown, you actually started a sort of a lockdown cyanotype diary. Is that right?
Yes. I was literally I'd coated up a batch of paper, and every day, when we had that beautiful spring and summer, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, I was just doing like one cyanotype a day as a kind of diary, and I was put a significant object on there and note down some text from the news, because I saw it as a period I thought that was going to be a kind of one-off. I likened it in my mind to when my mum was evacuated in the war, and she always tells that story of the time when she was an evacuee, and it was just a period of months. But of course, it's dragged on a bit, the lockdown, hasn't it? It'll probably be with us forever. But the point of that diary was to just encapsulate that moment for future generations, maybe. I was reading Samuel Pepys' diary as well. I've explored that. And he talks about the plague. That's what inspired me to do this cyanotype diary, and I'm trying to get it finished in the next couple of weeks, ready for another exhibition I've got coming up.
Oh, that would be amazing. Do you know will that be an in-person one at all, or is that going to be online?
Well, this is going to be for Deptford X, which is a festival in Deptford, which is lovely. I've taken part in it many times, and it's going to be all outdoors this year. So I'm planning to hang my some cyanotypes up around the railway bridge at Deptford, near Deptford Station. So that's starting on the 9th of July, and I'm doing an online talk, artist talk as well. But they've been very careful to make it COVID safe. So a lot of it's going to be online, like my talk, and
I mean, it's
the work to be outdoors.
It's beautiful that we do now have. I guess in a way, for artists, it's always wonderful to see work in situ and on display in person, but also having this almost now second nature that we can do things online and other people can access it from other places. So I'll be very excited to have a look and see, and hopefully sort of see or join your talk or things like that, which I guess that's possibly one of the positives that I keep saying.
I guess I'm trying to tell myself there's positives, because you can connect, as you say, with this worldwide audience in a way for these things. But at the same time, I think it's another step in our disconnection with nature, because without a doubt, in the last year, a lot of people are just glued to screens, fortunately, on Zooms and things like that, and they're even less out and about, realizing that there's nature, trees being cut down left, right, and centre, etc.
Yeah, sort of, and things on their doorstep that they might not ever discover if they don't go out. So yeah, I think getting the balance right is probably the way we're going to have to tackle it all, isn't it? Really, sort of working in person and working online.
Yes.
But one of the things that happened just before the lockdown is you actually installed a fabulous commission that you did in Deptford, and I've obviously been able to see it online, but I think you weren't because of the lockdown situation. It wasn't able to have its usual sort of opening event. But what can you tell me about that project then?
Yeah, we just finished that before lockdown. I finished that, and I applied for a commission and won it, which was great. And I had to produce 4 artworks for this new building, and it was based on the history of Deptford docks.
Okay.
So I did a lot of research, and I had some help from local historians and the community garden there in Deptford as well. And I researched John Evelyn, who was a figure in the area who worked a lot with plants and plants that were imported into the docks. He was a kind of scientist, and he was a big exponent for green spaces, actually.
Okay.
And one of his descendants went on to form the National Trust, in fact. So I was hugely influenced by all the research, actually. And he did things like make hybrid trees and hybrid species. There's a very old mulberry tree in Deptford that was planted around that time. And it was just fascinating, tracing his footsteps and reading his diaries. And I also worked at there's a church there which has some fabulous wood engravings. It was just like being transported into another time, and to compare what was happening then with what's happening now, I think I learned a lot. I produced, inspired by his book Silver, which was about the propagation of forest timber. He was specifically growing, finding scientific ways to grow forests of trees in Kent for shipbuilding. So they were doing things like bending the timber. Sorry, this isn't really related to photography.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. I love it.
That inspired me to try and do a cyanotype of an entire tree, which was a huge task, but I eventually managed it, and I made a kind of frame out of what looked like timbers from a ship with the names of ships that were built in Deptford on it.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, and then I did some big photo collages, and I did some log collages as well. So they were the artworks there. It was a fantastic experience.
Will that stay up then in situ?
Yeah, it's up now, and I must try and get some better photos of it at some point. It's not open to the public, but I'm going to get some better photos from my website. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question now, because one of the things from that project, I think it's the Timber Yard project. Is
That's
that
right? That's the one.
And like you've spoken about the different aspects of the work you've created for that, and one of them is To the River. But as part of that, you actually mention a mythical mermaid of Deptford Creek.
Yes.
Now, I actually really love any mermaid story. I'm fascinated by it, and because I do I'm sort of fascinated by sort of those sorts of stories. I'm really sort of excited about another project where you've mermaids and plastic. So what's that one about, and why mermaids for that one?
Yeah, well, equally, I'm a Pisces. I don't know if you are.
I am. Yeah.
You are. You can spot them. I've been working in darkrooms before where I found out that everyone in there is a Pisces, and I think it's something to do with us being fish, and we like water, and we like processes. But and we're all fascinated by the sea and the rivers, and it's just always the case. So yeah, when I was researching this project in Deptford, one of the old stories I came across was about the Deptford Necker, which was a mermaid that is allegedly sighted in Deptford Creek. So I kind of explored that idea and dressed up a model as a mermaid, and photographed her on the banks of the Thames here. And yeah, that's something I'm going to explore more of. But in my head, yes, the idea was, imagine if there are mermaids in the Thames still, and maybe they're drowning in all this plastic packaging, because I was experimenting with plastic bags and things at that time. And it's really interesting working with plastics and cyanotype, because the sun goes straight through them. Of course, they are virtually invisible, and unlike any other object, except for perhaps glass, but glass is even different. So it was really interesting exploring it as a material. So my premise was these mermaids are there, but they are trapped or wrapped up with plastic packaging. And I'll tell you one story of a failed piece. I printed this huge mermaid. I'm not joking. In the darkroom, this must have been 5 foot, 6 foot long, onto a piece of kind of plasticky glass, and I was going to make like a stained glass window, and I'm still going to do this one. This just before locked, and it looked absolutely amazing. This mermaid, it came out really well. You know, using the liquid emulsion, it's quite tricky.
Yeah.
But then I made the classic mistake, and I'm sure the photographers listening will like to hear this. I turned the hot tap on instead of the cold tap to rinse it. And I watched my mermaid melt off the surface.
Oh no!
Swim down the drain.
Oh no! Oh,
that was one of those disasters that happened.
But there's almost something poetic to that as well.
Yes, but I am going to continue with these mermaids because I've actually been selected to exhibit as part of the Thames Festival that's happening in September. So I'm probably going to do cyanotype mermaids and paint them and colour them and tone them with teas and coffees and things like that. I'm going to make some really beautiful mermaids for that.
Oh, brilliant. I'm going to look forward to that one as well. Now, one of the latest things that you've been up to, and I think you touched on it when we first started chatting, and again, absolutely love this work. You've got sort of some, I think, initial examples on your website, and that's the Leaf Project.
Yes. And I've yet to unveil the full finished series, but it is just about there now, and I sent you a little taster.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, if people were looking at your website, sort of the idea around it is you've combined portraits of people in London who have a connection to the environment or an interest in the environment, and you're sort of chatting to them. And you're taking notes about what they're saying. So what's the sort of what will be the culmination, if you can give it away?
Yeah, sure. No, because I had this idea a couple of years ago, really, and I thought, how can I show that people are connected with nature? How can I really emphasize this? And I used the most literal method I could think of, which is printing their face right onto a leaf, because I started thinking, you know, we are like plants, really. We are another species, and there's so many of us like leaves. And when I was on my daily walks in lockdown and through autumn, I just started collecting leaves. And also I'd been collecting leaves from sites where the trees had been pulled down to make way for new developments. I just find it really sad. For example, in Deptford, Tide Mill Gardens, they cut down a lot of trees to make way for new flats, and it was just tragic. People protested, but nothing can be done. So I just picked up some of those leaves, and from other places too, and I pressed them and dried them. And at first I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but then it soon became obvious I was going to print people's faces on. And I put a call out for people who had something to say about the environment to get involved. And because I feel, you know, with these stories about the environment, it's not just about me. It's not just about what I think. It's about what other people think.
Yeah.
And the people I photographed they were all just local people and from all walks of life. You know, someone said to me, well, why aren't you photographing Greta Thunberg or whatever? And I said, no, it's important what ordinary people think.
Yeah.
So people were talking to me about the foxes that run through the garden and just interesting little stories that I hope to display with these leaves. So I've literally talked to these people, taken their portrait with my Holga, and then printed their face onto the leaf in the darkroom. And it's been a real labour of love, because a lot of the prints don't work, and you've got the chemicals of the leaves to juggle, and they're very, very fragile, which is the kind of point of it, really, because like us, you know, and like nature, everything is fragile and very delicate. And we spend so long as darkroom printers trying to make these archival prints, you know, it's like the thing you aim for. But this kind of goes against that, because eventually these leaves will just decay to nothing.
Yeah, I do. I love that sort of the sense of your work, and this element of work where you can tell a story, but you know it is going to fade away, and it's almost like that message to ourselves. If we don't start looking after things, then you know we will fade away as a species. And
yes,
yeah, so it's but it's a really lovely way, I think, to get conversations going and get people perhaps thinking in new ways and looking at things in different ways. And so that one's almost sort of come to completion. Is that something that you'll be hoping to show? Or
photographed like 7 people for that, and I've used them all in it. So I've got 7 really nice leaves. But it's one of those projects, like with everything I do, I could just carry on doing it.
Yeah.
Everyone I meet who's got something to say about the environment, yourself, for example, Josie, might find, if I ever meet you, might find yourself printed onto a leaf.
Hey. Oh, I'd be honoured. It'd be amazing.
Yeah.
But there's one other thing that I discovered on your website, and I'm really intrigued about this one as well, is that actually this year, not only a new project, sort of your photographic project with the leaves, but you've also been building a darkroom from recycled materials.
Well,
which is amazing.
Kind of. It might not be as glamorous as it sounds, but
I'm sort of imagining lots of I don't know, found plastic bottles. I don't know what I'm imagining, actually.
Actually, I have got an enlarger in there, but that is one that someone gave me. So that's what I mean, in that it's a reused, you know, there's nothing kind of new going into it.
So a begged, borrowed, but not quite stolen.
Yeah. So I've managed to, I've got a room in what's basically a tower block, which has been given over to artists for a year before they turn that into flats.
Oh, amazing.
Block. So I've got a very small room in there, and the one good thing about it is it's got a sink. It's the only room I could find with a sink. But literally I only have it for a year, so I need to pull my finger out and get the dark one finished, because it's an old office and it's got glass walls. So problem number 1 is this week I've been trying to black out the walls, which I've just about managed to do. But yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that everything that goes into that is, I'm not buying anything from new. Well, I can't afford it anyway, but so I've got I went down to B&Q, and they gave me an old bit of wood, which I made into a bench in there. And I got some bits and pieces out of skips to wood. And I've managed to buy very cheaply off eBay used trays and tongs, literally like for 99p and so on. And I think it's lovely to think that you know, I'm using something that someone else has used and doesn't want anymore. It's all about reusing, isn't it? Rather than buying loads of new plastic stuff. It makes a big difference. And I must say thank you to Steve, who sent me an enlarger. He was the one that started this, really. But he just said, I've got a spare enlarger someone's given me. Do you want it? And I said, yes.
Brilliant.
And that set me on the path to setting up this darkroom.
Oh, that is fantastic. It's so lovely when other people are sort of join in and are supportive and can get really excited about it all. I just love it. So yeah, I hope it goes incredibly well for you.
Thanks.
And it's a shame it's only for a year, but you know, a year's better than not at all. So yeah. So other than building yourself your recycled dark room, what else is coming up do you have, you've mentioned the festivals.
Yeah.
Do you have any other exhibitions or any other work in progress that you want to give a mention to?
Well, another thing I've been working on is some big black and white photograms in the darkroom, where I've kind of blown up little bits of seeds and little bits, tiny pieces of plants, and made big kind of abstract black and white prints. And touch wood, I think that work's going to get featured by Ilford soon, so that's something to look out for on their
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. That sounds yeah, they sound like they'll probably look really incredible. And is that sort of, do they sort of look quite microscopic, or?
Yes, they do. And again, it's me trying to look deep into plants to find kind of the answers to the universe. I haven't found the answers yet, but I keep looking. And these are really big prints. And the only thing is, when you look at them online, they could be a small print of a small flower, but they're actually really big. You know, so one day I'm going to have to find somewhere to exhibit those as well, because the scale is really important.
Yeah.
So I'm framing those at the moment as well. So I'm looking for somewhere to exhibit those and somewhere to exhibit the little leaves. I could do both together, couldn't I? Really?
Yeah. The big and the small.
Yeah.
Big and small ideas. And
Yeah.
I think sort of all those ideas, I think you might, I'm not sure if I've read it on your website, but sort of because you love sort of the science side of things, that one of your projects, which I'm awfully sorry I have gone and forgotten the name of, I think it's to do with dragons.
That was the
it is Baby Dragons.
Yes, that was something I did with my colleagues at the Gate Darkroom. Lovely group of photographers. We set up a community darkroom in Woolwich, and that was an exhibition we had that was themed on mapping, and my response to that was to try and kind of map my moles on my body.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I kind of made them out to be like constellations of stars. And I was looking at old maps there, and that phrase, "Here be dragons," was something that they used to write on the maps where there was an area where they didn't know what was actually there. So
that
they just imagined there was dragons. Links back to the mermaids again, doesn't it?
Yeah, I love it. It's so exciting. Now, one of the things that I tend to ask everybody that comes onto the podcast is just really how they feel working photographically in a sort of more eco-conscious manner, either such as you do with the plant material, or using processes that perhaps are not as traditionally potentially damaging to the environment, or in sharing and raising environmental awareness. How do you think photography can have an impact or make a difference?
Yeah, I could fill a whole episode just talking about this. So, okay, the question A there, using the ecological ingredients in things, I think it's good to draw people's attention to where they get their supplies from in all walks of life. I mean, people these days are starting to look at things like the fact that their mango has been air freighted from Brazil or wherever, and they're thinking, oh, maybe we shouldn't send that plane out, maybe we should buy something more local. So people are looking at where things come from. And I think that the whole thing about using plants and chemistry makes people examine their lives. We all just carry on day-to-day busy lives, and we don't often stop and think about where things come from and how things are made. So the fact that a lot of people look at my work and their first reaction is, oh, how did you do that? Draws attention to the process that I've used. I think that's a good thing, because it's a very different reaction than just consuming media like a soap opera where you just sit down and glaze, tune out. And then the other part of the question, I think that photography and film, television are, you know, the most powerful forms of medium out there to change, to sway people's opinion. You know, I heard an example recently where some of the kind of violent outbreaks in Israel were and don't quote me on this, were fueled by TikToks of people setting fire to buildings and dancing outside the buildings. And apparently those were they were edited together to make it look like certain people were responsible for the violence, but it was kind of false, really. Yeah. But even so, that caused people to pick up arms and go out and fight. Yeah. So nothing can move people more than a photograph. I mean, I remember as well the pictures of the life jackets on the beach. Yeah. When there was a whole kind of Brexit talk about immigration, and the photographs that stick in your mind, or like that, or the birds with a plastic bag wrapped around its beak. Those images really do make people do action. Yeah. So I think it is powerful, whether it's in the right hands or the wrong hands. It's the most powerful medium out there, really.
Whether people are aware of it or not, it does influence and every day, so in so many different ways. Certainly in the culture that we live in, it's you know, you are surrounded by still or moving images. So yes, sort of the ethics of how photography is used to share environment related stories or raise awareness of issues is really important and vital. But I do sort of, you know, my personal sort of work is along similar lines, as in using processes that might not be the norm, so it could stop someone and give them the chance to have a conversation. Yes. Which I think is a wonderful way that you're working, and I'm really sort of looking forward to all the things that you've mentioned and that are coming up for you this year. Have you got sort of any long-term future aims, any sort of secret sort of wishes that you could do photographically?
When I started making this cyanotype a day in lockdown, and that became a kind of diary, I quite enjoyed putting the text with it, and I think I would like to do more in the way of kind of photo books or mixing text with things. But that's something I haven't really done before, so that would be nice. I'm always up for trying new things, you know. I must admit, cyanotype, I've done so much of it now. I have to say I'm getting a bit bored of it. I can't believe I'm saying that. I've done everything I can with that medium, so I'm now looking for another one. I'm doing a lot of stuff with paint as well at the moment.
Okay.
Because I find that painting with paint is very similar to painting with light, really. It's just, it's a lot quicker and a lot easier. You just get a paintbrush, and where you want white, you put white. You want black, you put black.
Oh, fantastic. So if people wanted to find out about your work, Sarah, where can they find you? Website, social medias, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so my website is www.sarahgarrod.co.uk, and my name is spelled SarahGarrod for David. People always spell my name wrong. And then on Facebook, my photography page is facebook.com/Sarah G Photog. And then on Instagram, I'm at Sarah G .photog. And when I mean PHOTOG. Where else might I be? That's it, isn't it, really?
Fantastic. I will make sure all those links to your social media and to your website are in the podcast text as well. And I'll try and link to any sort of the upcoming festivals or shows that you're having. Do let me know. Keep us posted. We can share those on for you as well. But I
love
really...
your work as well, by the way. I really enjoy looking at your work.
Oh, bless. Oh, thank you. I do feel that there's a bit of a synergy in some of the things that we do, in the sort of the interest. I think obviously we've discovered the fascination with mermaids and and sort of working with anthotypes and cyanotypes, etc. Looking forward to seeing what you get up to next, Sarah, and the leaf project. Love that. So
thanks.
I'll keep an eye out for that.
Thanks ever so much.
I've really enjoyed chatting with you, Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Bye.
Bye, Sarah. That was an absolute delight. I really enjoyed having a chat with Sarah and listening to her talk about her work and all the things that inspire her and her love for nature. Do head over to her website, sarahgarrod.co.uk, and find out more about her. You can also find her social media links on her website, but I will put them all in the podcast details too. And if you'd like to take part in the podcast and have a chat with me, Josie, do please get in touch via my website, which is josiepurcellphotography.com. See you next time. Yay! Welcome to the Photopocene podcast with me, Josie. On this episode, I chat to a photographer, Jonathan Straight, about his street portraiture and in particular his new book, Vegans in Iceland. Although Jonathan isn't specifically concentrating on environmental matters, his topics often reflect them or relate to them in some way. Hear more about his style, his relationship to people in his images, and his other photography books, including about the ambulance service in Israel. And also you'll hear about him finding thousands of black and white family negatives and how his late father was his photographic inspiration. He picked up his first camera as a 7-year-old. Carry on listening to find out more. I'm really pleased this time on the Photopocene podcast to be joined by a photographer who specialises in documentary, portrait and street genres, although I think he will probably be able to tell us an awful lot more about his passion for photography and his interests in photography. But that is Dr. Jonathan Straight. So welcome, Jonathan. Really, really pleased to have you here.
Thank you, Josie. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
And you're chatting to me from Yorkshire, Leeds, is that right?
Yes, I'm in Leeds, North Leeds, just on the edge. So built up behind me and green fields in front of me.
Beautiful. I do have a slightly hazy memory of Leeds. I had a friend at college who lived in Mirfield and spent a couple of weekends visiting Leeds many moons ago.
It's an interesting place, is Mirfield. My late father, who was an avid photographer, and maybe we'll talk about later, was by profession a child and adolescent psychiatrist.
Okay.
And Mirfield was actually in his patch.
I'm actually down in Cornwall, and I believe you've recently visited Cornwall and the Eden Project, is that right?
Yeah, it was just before lockdown, and I'd met Sir Tim Smith a couple of times when he'd visited Leeds. We have a mutual acquaintance, and I'd spoken to him about whether there was something to document, whether there was something to photograph, and he said, well, come down, spend a day and let's see what happens. So I spent a day at the Eden Project, and there weren't really people to photograph, but there were lots of interesting shapes and objects and geometric formations of parts of geodomes and that kind of thing. So the shots I came back with were really very different from anything I'd done before, and indeed anything I've done since. They were very arty, sort of black and white geometric shapes. Anyway, he loved them and said, you know, I recognize all the things you photographed, but you've really made them look very different to how they would look in, you know, if you were actually there.
I'd really love to be able to see them at some point. So do let us know whether they're online on a website or somewhere else.
I will, of course. Those are set up as NFTs actually, so people who want to speculate on digital artwork can have a look at those.
Just sort of going back in time even more than just over 12 months ago, you mentioned your late father, and I believe he was instrumental in your sort of love and understanding of photography, and it was in his dark room at home that you sort of got your grounding and started off. I mean, what age was that?
Well, my first camera I think I had when I was 7 years old, and I used to like playing with bits of electronic stuff, or, you know, whatever was lying around that people wanted to get rid of, and somebody put a Kodak Brownie in my toy box, and so I had to get some film for it, and I think my first photographs, which are pretty lousy, were taken at 7 years old, and I then got bought a 35mm camera for my 10th birthday. Again, you know, nothing fantastic, but a camera where you had to set everything manually, which taught me how to take photographs. And my father was a very keen photographer, always 35mm and black and white, probably until, you know, nobody really was using black and white. Then he switched to color slides. But in the years he was using black and white, he put a dark room together, which was actually in the family bathroom, and, you know, you were in or you were out, and I used to go in, and he'd you know, black out the window, lock the door, put a piece of wood over the bath so he could stand all his chemical trays on there, and it was great fun to watch what he did, and, you know, that's how I learned about dodging and burning and you know, exposing different parts of the paper at different rates. And although I never did any physical work in a dark room, the digital work I came to do later on followed the same sort of pattern. So it was a good grounding, and he was a pretty good photographer.
Did he have a sort of a preference or any particular style? Was he? Because I mean, we'll talk in a moment about sort of your street work, and you do an awful lot of work, photographs of people. Was that his thing, or was he more sort of environmental, architecture? Was there a distinctive element to his work?
Not really. I think mostly he was taking pictures of his family, although when he passed away, I found an archive of black and white negatives. It was an old shoebox, and there were about 6,000 negatives in this box. Maybe not quite six. Maybe it was 6,000 with some colour slides, but certainly several thousand in the box. And there were pictures of Christmas at the hospital he would have been working at the time, and the staff play and some of the inmates and this kind of thing. But mostly it was pictures of family gatherings, and he was the one who turned up with a camera and documented, you know, who was there. So it was mainly pictures of people, and he was pretty good at taking pictures of people insofar as family shots go.
What an amazing find. I must admit myself, whenever I visit my mum, I'm always, she keeps all her old photographs in an old handbag, and I'm always find myself drawn to it, sort of rooting through, but to find something like that. And so did you manage to actually print all of the images out then from?
Well, what I did was have them digitized, because I remember many of these photographs as little 3x3 prints
Yeah.
in albums, and they'd become quite faded. When I had them scanned, I was really taken with the vivid contrast. I don't know what film he used, but the blacks were black, the whites were white, and that was something I was very keen to achieve in my own photography, a sort of high contrast. And it really brought these images to life. You know, a lot of them were pictures I was very familiar with, but I've never seen them in their true glory, as it were, before.
Yeah. I mean, you saying that with that influence on your own work, and you are on Instagram, and your Instagram page is just fantastic black and white portraits of people. And obviously this is your street style. And I've had a really lovely look through, and there is one, I think, from 2018, which is belly out on Blackpool Beach, which is stuck in there.
Yes.
But you know, out of all of the ones, you know, yeah, such great images there,
and most of the people have no idea that they're on Instagram, and some of them have had very large prints put on walls at exhibitions, at galleries, and also have no idea, which is quite fun. Although I did do one exhibition of photographs taken at Leeds Pride, and by the end of the 6-week term that ran for, probably half of the subjects had come in or had found out, and I'd subsequently met them, and I decided if anybody discovered that they were my subjects, I would give them the print. And these were big, you know, they were maybe 4 by 5 feet. They were quite large prints. But about half of the people I'd photographed ended up getting in touch, and some of them are still in touch, and that's quite nice.
That's brilliant. So when you find then that when you're actually out and about on the streets taking photographs of people, and that, you know, a lot of the people in your images are looking directly at you, so there's an awareness that they've been photographed, but do they just then move on? Do you ever stop and have interactions with them?
So sometimes, I mean, when they're looking at the camera, they're not necessarily aware I'm taking a photograph. They might be a bit uncertain. They might think I might be taking a photograph. Quite often people apologize for getting in the way, which is great, because, you know, I photograph them, and you learn all sorts of techniques for actually being very, very close to people, because I've shot most of this work with a Fujifilm X100, which is you know, a prime lens. I think it's 28mm. So you've got to be fairly near to the subject to get a good shot. And you learn ways of actually standing very close to people and taking their picture, and they may even see you, but they don't actually believe you're taking a picture of them. Probably once a year somebody kicks off and asks me to delete the picture, but that's fine. You know, obviously you don't want people to be unhappy. And I have to say, I take a perverse pleasure if somebody has really kicked off and not asked me to delete the picture, to get that one up on Instagram pretty quickly.
Do you around, I mean, the sort of the ethics then of taking photographs on the street, because if you're on a high street as a photographer, as long as you're not harassing someone, you can take someone's photograph.
You can, yeah. And you know, if somebody goes out, they are putting themselves at risk of their image being taken. Their image is being taken all the time anyway, by CCTV. Sometimes there are interactions. Sometimes people stop and talk to me. There was a Russian lady I photographed on Oxford Street, and she stopped me and she said, "Well, look, if you are going to take a picture of me, why don't you take a good one?" And she posed. And the funny thing is, you know, we've kept in touch. We chat on Instagram from time to time. We meet for a coffee sometimes if I'm in London. It's really bizarre where your connection to somebody is only that you randomly took their photograph in the street. And there are quite a lot of people that I've met that way. It's quite interesting.
That's brilliant. I mean, did you ever feel nervous about street photography, and when you were first? I mean, you're obviously drawn to photographing people.
In general, I'm quite confident that there are things that can happen that knock you. So somebody having a row with you can really affect your confidence. Or the other thing is, if you go out for a day and you actually come back with nothing, you've actually walked the streets for a whole day and taken lots of pictures and they're all lousy. That's a bit disheartening. But in the main, no, I'm fairly confident about what I do. And there are all these tricks. You can sort of pretend to be photographing something, and then as you are supposedly reviewing your shot, you actually take a picture of somebody who's standing 2 feet away from you. So there are tricks where you can actually be very, very close to somebody and take their picture, and they actually have no idea what you're doing.
I mean, I think, wasn't it, I don't know the exact names of them, but there were cameras, weren't there, with the lenses where you could point one way, but actually the lens was cut out in the side, and so it took the picture. So
it's true. And there was also a very early camera which was designed to fit into a brown paper parcel. So it was disguised as a parcel somebody was carrying, but it actually was a camera.
Wow.
So this sort of covert cameras have been around from very early on. People seemed to want to document what was happening in the street from quite early in the evolution of photography.
Yeah, definitely. One of the other things I'd really like to talk to you about as well is the fact that you have 2 books.
Yeah.
And the first one is I think it's 2018, but do please correct me if that's wrong. But that was called Blood, Sweat, Tears and Helicopters. And
that's right.
That was actually photographing the Israeli ambulance service. So how on earth did you end up doing that?
Well, the book has actually been redone this year as Blood, Sweat, Tears and COVID-19. So it's a slightly expanded edition with a bit more information in it and some images of the COVID response, which I didn't take because I wasn't able to go there. But there are more of my shots in the book. So I'd done a couple of shoots in Israel, which is an amazing country for street photography because you have a really divergent population. They're dressed in all sorts of different ways. There are lots of really interesting people. And because it's a country with a big tradition of tourism, you don't look out of place with a camera wherever you are. So people are quite at ease with photographers. In fact, when I photographed Pride in Tel Aviv, which I did in 2018, I'd never seen so many photographers at an event. It was unbelievable. And the kit these guys have got, just beyond belief. One guy was talking to me, had a medium format Fujifilm on one side and a Leica on the other side. Some serious equipment. But there's a charity in London that raises money for the ambulance service in Israel to buy vehicles, to buy ambulances and to buy motorbikes. And I was helping them with a project when they saw my street photography, and they said, "We really like what you're doing, and we commission a lot of photography, but it's all staged and it looks staged.
Yeah.
What do you think about going out in an ambulance?" And I was quite apprehensive because, there's a real randomness to what you might end up seeing.
Yes. Yeah.
But I had another trip to Israel booked. I was working on a street photography project, which is yet to see the light of day, which is called Faces of the Galilee. So I had this trip booked, and I said, "Well, look, set up a day, and I'll do a day. You go as a volunteer on an ambulance crew, except I had a camera, and it's quite challenging from a photographer's point of view because you've only got available light in the ambulance. It's not bad light, but it is what it is. the vehicle is moving, and you haven't got a great deal of space because generally there's a patient on a stretcher being attended to by a couple of people. And the other thing is, I was told I was not allowed to show the faces of the patients. So there were a few challenges to deal with, but I did the shoot. Thankfully, we didn't attend anybody that day who was in particularly dire need. We picked up people, took them to hospital. You know, you'd have a patient on the stretcher, blood pressure being taken, this kind of thing. And I was sitting at the back of the patient's head. So I had quite a good vantage point where the face wasn't visible, but you could see everything that was going on. So I did a few shots, brought them back. The guys in London loved them and commissioned a few prints for their office. So I did some quite large prints for their office walls. And then we got talking about books and this project, the street photography project I was working on. And they said, do you think we could have a book? So I said, well, yes, but I need to spend quite a bit more time and I need to see everything that's going on. So I arranged a week and spent a week with ambulance crews all over Israel. And the amazing thing is you have Jewish crews, they might be religious crews, they might be secular, you have Arab crews, you have mixed crews, you have every kind of person you can imagine working in these vehicles. And the people that you're treating, the people you're attending to, are of the same mix.
Yeah.
And nobody says, oh, well, hang on, we can't come to you because you're this colour or that colour. Everybody is treated equally. And I thought this was a story that really needed to be told. So I documented what I saw, and I photographed their call centres, I photographed the laundry, everything I saw, I took pictures of. I came back with about 2,500 images. And one of my bits of the brief, if you like, were to show the diversity of the organization. So I had all my pictures laid out, and frankly, you couldn't tell the ethnicity of people just by looking at their image. I needed something a bit more visible, a visual way to show diversity. And then I thought, I wonder if they have any crew, female crew, who wear Islamic headdress, who wear a hijab. And they said, well, probably we do. We'll have a look. We'll see. So I went back and took a whole load more photographs with some Bedouin women who were running an ambulance crew. And that's given me this very visual demonstration of the diversity of the organization. So it was an amazing project to do. And the book was given to donors of this charity. And it has been very well received. So it was a great thing for me. And they actually use my images in all of their press advertising now as well.
That was your first book, and now you've actually this year, have you published it, or is it just about to be published? It's called Vegans in Iceland, or of Iceland?
Yeah, Vegans in Iceland exists. It is in print. There are quite a lot of copies in my garage, if anybody wants one. But this is the story. So I used to go somewhere every year on my own. I was given a sort of dispensation by the family to go off for a week and take photographs. So I did a couple of Israel trips, as I've explained, but I also spent a week in Ibiza, which was really interesting. I spent odd days. We had a family holiday in Spain, so I nipped off to Tangiers for a day.
Fantastic.
So always interested to go to exotic places and take some pictures. And I read a book by an Icelandic author, and I thought, Iceland sounds a really quirky place. I wonder if Reykjavik should be my next destination. So I started looking at Reykjavik, and I follow a plant-based diet. I'm a vegan, so obviously anywhere I go for any length of time, I have to be sure I'm going to be able to eat food and survive, because there are parts of the world where
it would be
really
difficult.
can't do that. So I started. I found a lady on Facebook who ran a site called Vegan Travellers to Iceland, and I explained what I wanted to do. And she said, well, if you're coming to Reykjavik, we do the cube of truth on a Sunday. Maybe you'd like to photograph that. What's the cube of truth? I had no idea. So it happens all over the world apparently, and people stand back to back or in a quadrant. They wear Guy Fawkes masks, and they hold flat screens, so laptops or televisions, which show footage of animals being abused or slaughtered. And the idea is that this attracts attention and people engage in conversation, and they try to convert them to being vegan. And apparently they're quite successful. So I thought, well, yeah, this is fine. Why not? I said I'd love to. But is there anything else or anyone else that might be interesting to photograph? And this list came back of the most incredible characters. She told me about a transgender vegan baker. She told me about an octogenarian vegan, a famous Icelandic footballer who was a vegan, and it went on. And I began to think there was a project here. I don't normally do portraits where people sit. I normally capture what's happening. That's really my skill. But I thought, well, what's the difference? If somebody's sitting in a room, I'll just approach it in the same way. I'll try and capture the immediacy of what personality I'm perceiving from this person. So I booked, I don't know, I think there were about 16 sittings. And I went to Iceland and did them. It wasn't just in Reykjavik. I went to other parts of Iceland. I actually took an internal flight up to the north. I met a vegan female champion weightlifter, and a couple who were yoga teachers. I mean, they're amazing people, and they're all vegans, but they're all so different.
Yes, yeah.
And I also took pictures of Iceland. I took pictures of shops that had vegan signs, and went around the supermarket and took lots of pictures of products and packaging, and then went up to the old whaling station, which is miles from anywhere, and there are two boats there which were blown up by Sea Shepherd in the 1980s, two whaling boats, and they're moored in this little lake. That was an amazing thing, and I photographed one of the activists I met with these two boats as a backdrop. So I got some really interesting pictures, and I thought, you know what, there's enough here to do a book. And working with the same designer I worked with for the previous project, I put this together, and it's an interesting piece of work. I mean, the motivation was, this is the quirkiest thing anybody will have on their coffee table. You want a talking point, get a copy of Vegans in Iceland, because it will just make you look like you're so cool when you've got this on your coffee table. So it's available on Amazon, and it's also available at vegansiniceland.com.
Well, you very kindly sent through the mock-up as for me to have a look at, so I really do appreciate that. And as you say, there are some really interesting people in there with lots of different stories, but actually photographs with the text as well, that actually expands on what the image is and tells sort of that gives that real personal detail. It works really well in this book.
Well, it's kind of you to say that the challenge with a book is always, how do you structure it? Because for me, when I go out and take the photographs, I have no idea what this is going to look like when it comes back. And with the ambulance book, there was a structure that emerged based on this blood, sweat, and tears wording, which they had used to describe their service. So the pictures were able to be sorted. With this one, it was really a matter of, well, let's tell a story, of visiting a country and what I discovered and what I saw, and then talk about these people one after another, but put them in some kind of order, so there's a bit of an evolving story. And what you see is they're all very different people. The thing that
Yes.
the common thread is their diet, but they've all come to it for different reasons,
Yeah.
and they're all from very different backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's what's interesting about it.
Absolutely. You've got a gentleman in one of the portraits who I think is playing table tennis.
Yeah, he was 83 at the time.
Yeah, and you know, just really, really great stories. You've got a woman who I think is on TV in Iceland.
Yes, she's a famous presenter of a daily culture show in Iceland. I was rather hoping she'd invite me to go on her culture show as a guest, but
you never know.
Not yet.
You never know. But you've got artists, therapists, chefs. I mean, such a wonderful range of people as well, and touching on the politics of it. I mean,
well, a lot of them are activists.
Yes.
And I think what you find in Iceland is people are activists for many causes. So if they care about one thing, then they will start to care about other things. So one lady, as we were walking through the marina in Reykjavik, kept stopping to pick up litter because she said, you know, this will harm an animal.
Yes.
And that was sort of her activism. Plastics in the ocean, litter in the street, and veganism. Others had come to veganism through perhaps a struggle with their gender or a political struggle. The politics in Iceland are convoluted with a small number of people who control most of the resources, and a lot of people fighting against that.
So it's really good to actually give voice, I guess, to people as well, and that's something you've done through this book, because you do have so many different people, but with that one, you know, there is that one connecting element for all.
Yeah, and in fact, somebody said when I was first promoting the book, I can't think of a title less likely to sell a book, and I took that as a great compliment, because you know, I didn't really do this to sell books. I did it because there was a story I wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And I actually love making books of photographs.
I mean, obviously for yourself, you say you follow a plant-based diet.
Yes.
And you know, it has, I guess, veganism has grown so much in the last few years, regardless of the arguments around sort of the environmental impact of being a vegan as opposed to eating meat. I'm quite interested in the things from a photographic point of view, because obviously back in the day when it was film and printing, film traditionally used to use gelatin as part of its makeup. And when I'm sometimes running my workshops, I now make sure that I get, you know, you try your best, but sort of use art products that aren't don't use gelatin in their makeup, because watercolor paper can be sized with gelatin. So
yes,
you know, there's all these different considerations as well, and it's quite a
good
commitment.
Point you raise. Yeah. It's interesting. It's not something I'd particularly thought about. I think there's such a romance about the phrase silver gelatin. So maybe I need to think again. Although to be fair, I haven't printed anything for quite some time.
Yeah.
You know, I only print for exhibitions, or if somebody buys something, or somebody wants a print of you know, sometimes people get in touch and say, I really like this particular shot on Instagram, you know, can I have a copy? And I say, well, how big do you want it? Because you know, these little Fuji compacts will quite happily blow up to you know, 600 by 400 millimeters, no problem, with very good clarity. And same picture taken with my Leica Q, even bigger.
I'd really like to see them. I think that's the one thing. It's been wonderful being able to connect with people, and more people, you know, sort of working online and sharing and meeting online, becoming slightly second nature. But I think sometimes you do have to have the opportunity, don't you, to be able to see things.
I think so. It makes a big difference. I'm actually a trustee of an art gallery in Leeds called the Tetley, and obviously it's been closed most of lockdown. And looking at the exhibitions online just isn't quite the same as being there in person.
No, it's better than nothing.
True.
And I think I guess the one plus thing as well is I always sort of feel, well, at least it gives maybe people who would never have the opportunity to potentially go there in person. It does open the doors in that sense. But yeah, that's definitely something, like you say, seeing something in person really can be sort of
from a photographer's
emotional
point of view. It's been
Yeah.
a good time because all of the brands have been pumping content out, mostly without charge, and so you get to watch experts in certain fields explaining how they use software, or you get to see some very famous photographers speaking about their work. Companies like Leica, I'm on the Leica mailing list. They've put out some amazing content.
Yeah.
And normally they charge an awful lot of money for stuff, but they've put on quite a lot without charge, which has been a pleasure really over lockdown. I hope it carries on.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully it's a good sort of learning curve as well, maybe for companies, just trying things differently. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, it allows them to gain information about people and what people are thinking, what people own and what people are thinking about buying. But also the whole media. I mean, when I did a Zoom webinar about vegans in Iceland when it first came out, and I got people from all over the world. People who were following me on social media in the Far East, in the Middle East, in the Americas, literally all over the world. And I would never get that audience if I put on a physical exhibition.
Yes. So it definitely, I think, keeping both in person and online is probably going to be the long-term future, as for us anyway, hopefully, because it does, like you say, opens more opportunities. With your work and your street photography and your portraiture, your documentary photography, obviously when I'm looking at it, it's very much about the environment that people are in, the places that they exist in, they move through. Is that something that you think about in your work when you're taking photographs, the actual place as much as the person?
Well, my focus, to be honest, is the person, but in order to photograph that person, I have to be in a place, and I will choose places because they're places where I think I'll find interesting subjects, or there are places where it's going to be busy, because the busier it is, the easier it is to get very close to people without them necessarily noticing you. So somewhere like Westminster Bridge is the most brilliant location because everybody's gazing at Big Ben. It's probably great for pickpockets as well, but I've got a great shot in one of the rooms in my house of a lady taking a picture of Big Ben with a Leica M9, and you can literally read the numbers off the dial of her camera. I'm that near.
Wow.
So I know all the settings she used to take that shot. But sometimes, East London, you've got fantastic street art and graffiti in the background, which can really add something to a shot. So it is important, and I think it's probably something I should take more notice of. Where my work has been criticised in the past, the word context has come up quite a bit. The picture of the person is great, but what's the context? And that probably needs a bit of work in terms of, how do we place this person in their background? Let's not just have the aperture wide open so we get this lovely blurry bouquet, but maybe talk about what is happening behind the person or around the person.
sort of, yeah, and what's maybe outside of the frame, I guess, as well. And although it's really good, I think it's some, you know, to, if you're looking at street photography, pictures of people on location, I quite like that sense, for me personally, of almost being able to make up the story about what might be.
Well, that was interesting. When I did this, I did an exhibition of photography at Leeds Pride, and it ran for 6 weeks. I was given a shop in a nice smart shopping centre in the centre of Leeds, and I had to pay everything else other than the rent. So it actually was quite an expensive exercise. But what was interesting was, over the 6 weeks, gradually people would come and say, oh, I know that person, I'm going to tell them. And I found quite a lot of the people who I'd photographed. Now, what was interesting was, when you actually meet them and find out their stories, they're generally nothing like you imagined. And it was almost like, you know, that there might be a novel in this, you know, what I thought this person would be like, and actually what they're really like. Often their age is very different to how they come across in the photograph, and so you have a whole story you're building around this fictitious person, and you think, well, maybe they're this, maybe they're that, and then you meet them, it blows everything away. They're completely different.
So for you then, Jonathan, in sort of relation to photography and the environment, how do you think your photography can actually perhaps promote or enhance environmental matters? And is that something with the vegans in Iceland that you wanted to do?
It's a very interesting question. And if I tell you that in my professional life, I built up a business which was and still is the UK's biggest supplier of recycling bins, and that the work I do now is primarily around environment, about preventing food waste, and developing waste management in the low-income parts of the world where they don't have any. So all of that is going on in the background. Photography is a bit more of an escape, I suppose, and I hadn't really thought about using the medium to promote those ideals, because I suppose they are fulfilled hugely in the voluntary and professional work I do the rest of the time. But certainly the motivation to publish Vegans in Iceland was to say, look at this, it's not as weird as you think. Here's a country where everybody imagines people are stuffing their face with whale blubber, and can't get enough of eating fish and meat. And actually, there are a huge number of people who, if they're not wholly vegan, certainly identify with vegans, are happy to join the Vegans in Iceland Facebook group, which I think has got a huge proportion of the population following it. And so if it's not that crazy, then maybe you should think about it. Maybe it's something that you could do yourself, even one day a week, and that would have huge impact on the environment and your health.
Yeah, it's definitely worth people considering. So what's actually next for you then? You've got your the latest book out. Are you sort of just in the promotion stage of your book? Is that something that you'll do more of, or are you starting new projects? You mentioned one that you hadn't yet really seen the light of day. So that's something you might go back to?
Well, it would be nice to sell a few copies of Vegans in Iceland, because I have quite a lot of copies I printed. When you make a book, you really need to print a few hundred copies, otherwise it's not doing. This is not a sort of put your pictures online and get a photo book. This is a proper proper artistic endeavor. But yeah, I've got a body of street photography from it was intended to be northern Israel, but probably the whole of the country now, which was taken I would think from about 2015, 16, 17, 18, over those years. And I'd quite like to publish that. And I've got an interesting challenge here, because there are a few charities that are interested to get involved with it, and sell to raise money for their endeavours. But they want to print in all sorts of different parts of the world. So I'm trying to find a platform where I can sort of press a button and 50 copies will come out in America,
Yes.
and 100 copies will come out in Germany, and 200 copies will come out in Yorkshire, whatever, wherever there's a need, and small changes can be made to each edition. So I'm exploring that, and hopefully that will come together this year. So that is very much a live project. Lockdown creatively for me, I've produced 2 books during lockdown, but I don't think I've taken a picture. So I haven't felt any compelling urge that there's something I want to say about lockdown.
Yeah.
But I'm quite keen now people are out and about again to get out and take some more pictures. Places like London, really great, some great locations for street photography. I don't know, when are we allowed overseas? I'd quite like to. That day I had in Tangiers, I got some fabulous shots, and it was only a day. So I think there could be a few more little hops to places to do some more photography.
So if people want to find out about your work, either the street photography that you do, or to find out more about your books, where can they find you? Websites, social media?
So the best way is to go onto Instagram, and my page is Straight Pics, which is the word straight with PIX on the end. There's vegansiniceland.com where the book is available. It's also on Amazon, and I think it's half price on Amazon at the moment. That's really it for photography. You can find out about all my other stuff at jonathanstraight.com, or find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or Facebook.
Fantastic.
So, bits of me everywhere, but the photography is really on Instagram.
That is fantastic. Well, I certainly enjoyed looking at the mock-up of your book before it was became real, as it were, or physical, shall I say. It was real, but physical. People should head over and perhaps have a look at that, and definitely take a look at your Instagram.
Sure,
photo.
And we need to get you a copy to say thank you for this.
Oh, bless.
So happily send you one.
Oh, bless, that's really kind of you. Well, I've had a really lovely chat with you, Jonathan, and it's really interesting to hear sort of your story. And I just love the fact as well that at 7 years old you were taking your first photographs, and it stayed with you ever since. So that's brilliant.
It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was really interesting to chat with Jonathan all about his photography, and his black and white portraits are really fantastic. And do take a look at his book. Make sure you head over, check out his work on Instagram at Straight Pics, that's PIX, and at Vegans in Iceland. And I'll make sure any other links are in the podcast text as well. If you'd like to tell me your story and how you relate your photographic work to the environment and the world around you, do please get in touch, josiepurcellphotography.com. But I'll hope to see you next time. Bye.